The 911 call came in at 11:42 p.m. The operator could barely make out the voice, whispers, heavy breathing, and a faint sound of something shattering in the background. "Please, send someone. He's going to—" Click. The line went dead. When officers arrived at the modest blue house on Willow Street, the front door was slightly ajar. No lights were on inside, but the TV flickered in the living room, casting eerie shadows on the walls. The silence was unsettling. Not a single movement, not even the creak of a floorboard. As Officer Diane Morales stepped inside, she noticed it immediately, something dark, trailing along the hardwood floor, leading down the hallway. At the end of it, the bathroom door was shut, locked, but from beneath it, blood, thick, slow-moving, undeniable. They broke down the door. Jasmine Reed lay motionless on the tile floor, her hands still gripping a small folded paper, smudged with blood but legible. What it said would shake the entire case. But even more disturbing was Nathan Cole, her husband, sitting in the kitchen in complete silence, hands covered in blood, staring blankly at the wall. He didn't run. He didn't resist. He only said one thing: "She lied to me." If you want to understand the whole truth behind this case and not miss a single detail of the crimes that the world insists on forgetting, subscribe to the channel now and activate the bell. Here, each story reveals more than secrets. It reveals who we really are. You're part of it? Nathan Cole was the kind of man who made people feel safe. 35 years old, broad-shouldered with a steady gaze, he spent his days fixing cars at a small auto shop on the outskirts of Montgomery, Alabama. Customers loved him. He remembered names, kids' birthdays, even how people took their coffee. To most, Nathan was a quiet, reliable figure, a product of a small southern town where Sunday service was as regular as morning coffee. He grew up in a deeply religious household, the son of a steelworker and a schoolteacher. Church every Sunday, Bible study on Wednesdays. His father taught him discipline, his mother taught him compassion. But neither prepared him for loneliness. His past relationships had all been brief, uneventful. He wanted connection, but trust didn't come easy. When he met Jasmine Reed at a car meetup of all places, something shifted. She was unlike anyone he'd known, confident, warm, and effortlessly charming. She laughed at his jokes. She brought him coffee unprompted. She asked questions and actually listened. Jasmine had a spark that Nathan didn't know he was missing. Within weeks, they were inseparable. Jasmine, a 29-year-old hairstylist, had just moved to town and was trying to build a new clientele. She often spoke about fresh starts, about leaving the past behind and making a life where no one knew your history. Nathan liked that. He understood the need to wipe the slate clean. Their relationship moved fast. Dinners with friends, Sunday services, even trips to visit his mother. Jasmine was an instant hit with his family, especially his younger sister, who gushed about her fashion sense and sense of humor. Nathan's friends teased him, saying he finally looked happy. He was. They married after 8 months of dating in a quiet church ceremony. No extravagant party, just vows, close friends, and tears. Nathan cried as Jasmine walked down the aisle. It was the first time his mother saw him openly weep. He said it felt like God had finally answered a prayer. Jasmine moved into Nathan's small, carefully kept home on Willow Street. He installed a salon chair in the spare room to help her grow her business. They painted the walls together, laughed over takeout, and spent weekends curled up watching crime documentaries. Their life was quiet, simple, and for Nathan, perfect. But in the quiet, there were signs, small cracks beneath the surface. Jasmine had a locked drawer she never opened in front of him. She avoided questions about her past in Memphis. She flinched whenever certain names came up on the TV. Nathan noticed, but he ignored it. Love, he told himself, meant not prying. And besides, they were happy, weren't they? For most of his life, Nathan Cole had been chasing something he couldn't name. Stability, maybe, or love, or just peace of mind. After years of going through the motions, work, church, sleep, he was ready to start over, to write a new chapter that wasn't just about surviving. What he wanted, more than anything, was to build a life that felt complete. His parents had passed within 2 years of each other. First his father from a heart attack, then his mother from cancer. The silence that followed was unbearable. The house he'd inherited felt too big, too cold. His friends were getting married, having kids, living lives that looked full. Nathan, on the other hand, had his job, his Sunday sermons, and the occasional beer with co-workers. That was it. He wanted more. Not just any kind of more, but a home, a partner, a reason to wake up excited for something other than changing spark plugs. So when Jasmine Reed walked into his life, it felt like providence. He wasn't looking for anyone. In fact, he was fixing a Mustang when she appeared, bold red lipstick, a denim jacket, and eyes that seemed to know things. She asked if he could take a look at her car, which was making a weird humming sound. Nathan didn't even charge her for the inspection. Over the next few weeks, Jasmine kept finding reasons to stop by the garage. Sometimes it was car trouble, other times just coffee and conversation. She was quick-witted and curious, and she challenged Nathan in a way he wasn't used to. She wanted to know about his dreams, not just what he did for work. She complimented his patience, his voice, the way he looked when he was focused. No one had ever paid that kind of attention to him before. For Jasmine, Nathan represented safety, predictability. He was kind, respectful, and never pushed her to share more than she was ready to. She told him she'd moved to Montgomery for a fresh start, and he respected that. Everyone deserved one. Besides, he had his own ghosts. There was no need to dig into hers. By the 3rd month, they were spending most of their time together. Jasmine was setting up shop as a hairstylist in town and quickly developed a small but loyal clientele. Nathan helped her set up a home salon. He even built her a custom station from old workbenches. They had routines now, morning coffee runs, Sunday lunch with his sister, and movie nights that often ended with both of them asleep on the couch. Nathan felt grounded for the first time in years. He'd stop by the church more often, not just to pray, but to thank. He told Reverend Hastings that Jasmine was the biggest blessing he'd ever received. He believed it with every fiber of his being. The proposal wasn't dramatic. One rainy evening, after a quiet dinner at home, Nathan simply knelt down and told Jasmine, "You're the one I've been waiting for. Marry me." She said yes, before he could even finish the sentence. They both cried. They married in that same church a month later, surrounded by friends and the last few family members Nathan still had. Jasmine looked radiant, wearing a simple white dress, with her hair tied back in a vintage pin-up style. Nathan could hardly speak when he saw her at the altar. He thought to himself, "This is it. This is everything I ever wanted." They spent their honeymoon weekend in Nashville, nothing fancy, just a small rental and late-night walks under streetlights. For Nathan, those days were perfect. Jasmine laughed more than ever. She held his hand constantly, and when she looked at him, he felt seen, fully, completely. When they returned to Willow Street, Nathan wasted no time reshaping his life around theirs. He cancelled his weekly poker nights with co-workers to spend more time at home. He started looking into home improvement projects. He even considered switching to part-time work to help Jasmine grow her business faster. He wasn't just happy, he was invested. This was it, his chance, his future. But sometimes, late at night, he'd wake up and find Jasmine sitting in the living room alone, staring out the window. When he asked if she was okay, she always smiled and said she was just thinking. He didn't push. He didn't want to ruin what they had. He told himself she just needed time. That trust came in layers, that all the good things in life required patience. So he waited. And while he waited, he dreamed of children, of growing old together, of porch swings and holiday dinners, and a life far away from loneliness. He had everything he wanted, or so he thought. At first, it was easy to ignore. The little things. A locked drawer in Jasmine's salon room. A call she quickly silenced when Nathan walked into the kitchen. The fact that she never talked about her family, not even in passing. Nathan chalked it up to boundaries. Everyone had scars. He wasn't the type to pry, but the signs started stacking. Jasmine had become quieter. She still smiled, still kissed him before bed, but there was a distance in her eyes. Her laughter didn't linger as long. She was more tired, more distracted. One night, Nathan found her crying in the bathroom. When he asked why, she brushed it off with a weak smile, blaming hormones and stress from work. "I'm fine, babe. Just one of those days." Nathan didn't believe her, but he didn't push. Then came the envelope. It arrived on a Thursday morning, slipped through the front door with no return address. Nathan found it on the kitchen counter. Inside was a single sheet of paper with 3 words typed in bold black ink. Ask her everything. No explanation. No signature. He stared at it for several minutes, heart pounding. His first thought was that it was some kind of prank, maybe a disgruntled client of Jasmine's or a mistake meant for someone else. But something in his gut twisted. He didn't show her the note. Instead, he started watching, quietly, observing things he had once dismissed. Why did she always change clothes in the bathroom? Why did she delete her call logs? Why did she hesitate whenever he mentioned starting a family? One night, while she was in the shower, curiosity got the better of him. He opened her locked salon drawer using a spare key from the junk drawer. Inside, he found paperwork, medical forms, legal documents, all in a different name, Jason Reed. The room felt like it dropped 10 degrees. His hand shook as he flipped through the pages. There were references to hormone therapy, a name change petition, even a letter from a therapist. He stared at the papers, trying to understand what they meant, but his mind raced too fast to process anything. He closed the drawer and said nothing. Over the next few days, Nathan became distant. He still said, "I love you," still brought her coffee, but his tone had changed. Jasmine noticed. She asked if he was okay. He smiled too quickly and said yes, but he wasn't. The silence between them grew. Nathan's thoughts spiraled. He started questioning every moment of their relationship. Was it all a lie? Was she ever going to tell him? Did anyone else know? His upbringing haunted him. The sermons, the warnings, the language of sin and deception. He didn't know what to do with the collision between what he felt and what he'd been taught. Could he still love her? Had she betrayed him, or had he failed to ask the right questions? Then came the text message. It was from an unknown number. A photo. Jasmine at a pride march, years earlier, holding a sign that read, "Trans lives are sacred." Nathan stared at the screen, frozen. He hadn't seen that version of her before, not publicly, not proudly. The following night, they had dinner in silence. Jasmine picked at her food. Nathan didn't eat. When she reached for his hand, he pulled away. "I need to ask you something," he said, his voice low, "and I need you to be honest." She looked terrified. Nathan placed the envelope on the table. "Who is Jason Reed?" Jasmine didn't speak at first. Her hands trembled. Then, with a deep breath, she looked him in the eye. "I was going to tell you. I tried, so many times, but I didn't know how." His breath caught in his throat. "I'm still me, Nathan. Nothing has changed. I love you." But for him, everything had changed. The woman he'd married, the woman he'd built his dreams around, was now a question he didn't know how to answer. He didn't scream. He didn't cry. He just stared. And in that silence, a crack began to split open, one that neither of them would be able to seal shut again. The evening had started like any other. A quiet Tuesday. The sun had already dipped below the trees outside their Willow Street home, and the only sounds in the air were the occasional chirps of crickets and the low hum of a television set left on in the background. Nathan sat on the edge of their bed, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. Jasmine stood by the bathroom mirror, brushing her hair in silence. The air was thick, almost hard to breathe. They hadn't spoken since the night before, when her secret had finally slipped from the shadows into the light. Nathan couldn't shake the images, the paperwork, the old photo, the name Jason printed in black ink. He kept asking himself the same questions. Was I ever going to know? Would she have told me if I hadn't found out? Jasmine broke the silence first. "Nathan, can we talk?" Her voice trembled. Not from fear, but from fatigue, like she had been carrying this weight too long. "I didn't want to lie to you. I was just terrified of losing you, of this." He didn't look at her. "Then why not say something before all this?" "I tried so many times, but I saw how you spoke about things, about people like me. I was afraid you'd hate me." "I don't hate you," he said almost too quickly. Then, after a pause, "I just don't know who you are." That sentence hit harder than any insult could have. Jasmine's shoulders dropped. The woman who'd been so full of laughter now stood like a statue carved from grief. Nathan stood up and walked past her, heading for the kitchen. She followed, hesitant. "You said you loved me," she said, her voice cracking. "I did," he muttered. "I don't know what this is now." In the kitchen, he opened a drawer and pulled out a bottle of whiskey, something he rarely touched. He took a long drink, then slammed the glass on the counter. "You lied, Jasmine. This wasn't just a detail. This was everything." "It's not everything," she said softly. "I'm still me. The woman you married, the one who wakes up next to you every morning, the one who loves you." But he couldn't hear her anymore. Nathan's breathing grew heavier, his face flushed with confusion, anger, betrayal. His thoughts looped back to every sermon, every warning from his father, every conservative voice he'd absorbed. "This is wrong. You've been tricked. This isn't love. This is sin." He turned to her, eyes blazing. "Did you even plan to tell me, or were you just going to keep living a lie?" "I was waiting for the right time." "The right time? Jasmine, we're married." "I was scared." Nathan slammed his fist against the fridge. The sound made Jasmine flinch. A glass bowl on the counter shook and fell, shattering into dozens of pieces. She gasped, stepping back, her arms instinctively coming up to shield herself. "I didn't come here to hurt you," she whispered, but it didn't matter. Nathan's mind wasn't grounded in that kitchen anymore. It was elsewhere, trapped in a storm of betrayal and wounded pride. "You should have told me," he growled. "You should have given me the choice." She nodded, tears rolling down her face. "I know. I'm sorry. Sorry doesn't fix this." And then silence, heavy, thick, suffocating. Nathan turned and walked out of the kitchen. Jasmine followed cautiously, her heart racing. He went into the garage, where he kept tools, supplies, things he barely touched unless fixing something. She stayed in the doorway. "Nathan, please, let's talk. We can figure this out." But he wasn't listening. His eyes had locked on something beneath the tool bench, a small revolver, dusty, never fired, a family heirloom he once said he kept, just in case. He picked it up slowly, hands trembling, eyes blank. Jasmine's voice rose. "Nathan, stop. Don't. We can go to therapy. We can work through this." But it was too late. He stepped toward her with slow, mechanical strides. "I trusted you," he whispered. "I still love you," she said through sobs. "Please." She took a step back, then another. Nathan raised the gun. "No, Nathan, please." The sound of the shot echoed through the house like a thunderclap. The neighbors later swore they heard a loud scream, but only one. Jasmine collapsed, her body hitting the hardwood floor with a dull thud. Blood spread across the ground, soaking into the grain. Her eyes remained open, frozen in shock. Nathan stood over her, the gun still raised, his chest heaving. But it wasn't over. The rage hadn't left. The storm inside him hadn't calmed. He dropped the gun and walked to the kitchen, picking up the largest knife he could find. He returned to her side, and what happened next was too horrific to speak of clearly. His fury spilled out in brutal, merciless violence. By the time he stopped, Jasmine was unrecognizable. The walls were smeared with blood. The floor was slippery. Nathan fell to his knees, sobbing, shaking, holding her lifeless body in his arms. He didn't run, he didn't hide. He sat in the blood-soaked room, rocking back and forth, muttering over and over again, "She lied to me, she lied to me." The official call came in at 12:03 a.m. Officer Diane Morales was the first to arrive. By then, the neighborhood on Willow Street was already stirring. Porch lights blinked on, curtains shifted. People emerged in robes and pajamas, drawn by the sound of the gunshot and the unmistakable air of tragedy. The scene inside the Cole residence was one she'd never forget. Blood trailed from the kitchen to the hallway, smeared in erratic patterns. Broken glass crunched under her boots. The air was thick with iron and something else, something that smelled like grief. When she reached the bathroom, Morales stopped cold. Jasmine Reed's body lay twisted across the tile. Her eyes were still open. Her hands had clawed at the floor. The wounds, deep, jagged and deliberate, told a story of desperation and rage. One shot to the chest, multiple stabs. It was excessive. It was personal. And there, a few feet away, sat Nathan Cole. He was on his knees, covered in blood. His eyes were wide, unfocused, lips moving without sound. In his right hand, he clutched the revolver. The knife was on the floor beside him, slick and red. He didn't resist when Morales stepped in, didn't flinch when the cuffs snapped shut around his wrists. He only muttered the same thing again and again. "She lied to me. I didn't know. She lied." By the time backup arrived, the crime scene was already locked down. The forensics team moved quickly, photographing everything. Every blood spatter, every dent in the drywall, every detail of the horror Nathan had created. Nothing about the scene suggested a struggle for survival. Jasmine had tried to reason with him until the very end. The bruises on her arms weren't defensive. They were signs of someone who hadn't fought back. The community's shock was immediate and visceral. By morning, the news had spread like wildfire. Jasmine's name was on every local station, accompanied by grainy photos from her social media, her smiling behind the salon chair at a pride event, arm in arm with friends. The headlines were crude. Husband kills wife after secret past revealed. Trans woman slain in domestic dispute. Some used the word betrayal, others used deception. But few mentioned Jasmine's humanity. At the church, Reverend Paul Hastings tried to keep the congregation together. He called for prayer, for understanding. But whispers spread even within the sanctuary. Some called it sin, others called it sickness. Few, if any, called it murder. Jasmine's best friend, Sarah Coleman, was devastated. She didn't deserve this, she told reporters through tears. She loved him, she trusted him with everything, and he turned her into a statistic. Sarah knew Jasmine's fears, knew how she hesitated before getting too close to someone, knew how long it had taken her to feel safe. She didn't lie to him. She waited for the right moment, and that moment never came because she was afraid of exactly this. At Jasmine's memorial, dozens of candles lit the front steps of her salon. Clients, friends, and strangers came to leave flowers, notes, and photos. Someone pinned a quote from her social media page to the door. "I just want to live in peace, in love, in truth." The glass around it was cracked but still intact. Inside the jail cell, Nathan was silent. During his initial interrogation, he said little. When asked what happened, he looked at the detective and whispered, "She lied. She wasn't who she said she was. But she loved you." The detective pressed. Nathan blinked slowly. That wasn't love. The prosecutor later described Nathan's expression as void of remorse, but full of confusion, like a man who didn't yet understand the difference between heartbreak and hate. Mental health evaluators spent hours trying to assess his state. One report claimed he suffered from acute stress disorder. Another suggested he exhibited signs of internalized transphobia and repressed rage. Either way, the legal team began preparing a defense around emotional distress. They wanted to portray Nathan as a man overwhelmed by betrayal, but not everyone bought it. The LGBTQ+ community responded swiftly, organizing vigils and protests. Social media exploded with the hashtag Justice for Jasmine, sparking nationwide conversations about violence against trans women, particularly black trans women. Activists pointed out the high rates of murder within the community, often by people they knew, loved, or trusted. "This isn't just about one man's breakdown," one speaker said at a vigil. "This is about a system that tells people it's okay to kill someone when they don't fit your mold." Meanwhile, Jasmine's family flew in from out of state, too shattered to speak to reporters. Her mother, eyes swollen from crying, simply held a framed photo of Jasmine at her graduation. She didn't say a word. In Montgomery, people were divided. Some felt sympathy for Nathan. They saw him as a victim of deception. Others condemned him unequivocally, calling the act what it was: murder, rooted in hate and ignorance. The debate poured into local radio shows, town hall meetings, even school cafeterias. Everyone had an opinion, but few had compassion. The house on Willow Street remained taped off for weeks. Neighbors walked past it in silence, sometimes crossing the street to avoid looking directly at it. The porch lights were left on. Someone had forgotten to turn them off. Or maybe it was intentional. A haunting reminder. A place once filled with laughter and plans now stood as a monument to loss, a life stolen, a future erased. And for those who had known Jasmine, not just her name, but her heart, the grief ran deeper than words could touch. She hadn't died in a random act of violence. She had been destroyed by someone who claimed to love her, and that was the part no one could explain. If this story has touched you in any way, leave a like and comment on how you feel about it. Sometimes sharing what we think helps others understand that they are not alone. Your voice matters and can be what makes sense of it all. The trial was still weeks away when the first real twist emerged. Up until that point, the narrative was simple, at least in the eyes of the prosecution. A husband, shocked by a personal revelation, lashed out in an unforgivable act of rage. But stories, especially the darkest ones, rarely stay that simple. Detective Diane Morales had reviewed the evidence a dozen times, but something always nagged at her. Nathan's story was full of emotional weight, but the logistics, the cold procedural elements, just didn't add up. His reactions were too measured. His cleanup efforts were non-existent. It felt rehearsed, staged even. That suspicion turned into something more when forensics reported an anomaly. Traces of blood were found in Jasmine's salon room, tiny droplets behind the locked drawer where her documents were kept. Initially dismissed as residue from a cut finger or spilled hair dye, the lab confirmed it was Jasmine's blood, and more importantly, it had dried at least 3 days before the murder. That detail changed everything. If Jasmine had bled days before her death, then something had happened prior to the night of the murder, something Nathan hadn't mentioned. Morales dug deeper, reviewing the texts on Jasmine's phone, many of which had been deleted and partially recovered by tech experts. One text stood out. It was sent to her best friend, Sarah, 3 nights before the murder. "I think he knows. He's acting different. I'm scared." That was the first piece that suggested premeditation. Jasmine hadn't come clean in a calm conversation that exploded into sudden violence. She'd been living in fear, watching Nathan change day by day, waiting for the moment everything would fall apart. And then Morales found something else. The envelope with the typed message, "Ask her everything," was never submitted into evidence. It was mentioned in initial police interviews, but wasn't catalogued, photographed, or logged. Morales, frustrated, tracked down the officer who'd first entered the scene. He couldn't recall seeing it, but the prosecution had it. Nathan's defense team confirmed that the envelope was recovered later, found among the belongings in a storage box. And tucked behind the envelope was something else. A second note. This one handwritten, never shown to investigators. "She's lying to you. You deserve to know the truth. I can prove it." It wasn't signed, but handwriting analysis revealed something chilling. It matched an entry in Nathan's old journal, submitted by his sister during a background check. In short, Nathan had written the note to himself. He was both the messenger and the recipient. When Morales confronted the DA, she was met with silence. The prosecution had been building a straightforward case, but the detective was uncovering something darker, something more deliberate. Nathan hadn't just snapped. He had been spiraling, planning, waiting for the moment. Meanwhile, Jasmine's autopsy revealed more inconsistencies. She had bruises on her arms that were at least a week old, hidden beneath long sleeves, and in her lungs, traces of anxiety medication, meds not prescribed to her. Sarah confirmed Jasmine didn't take pills, not even for headaches. The theory emerged that Nathan may have slipped her something in the days leading up to the murder to keep her quiet, docile, afraid. As Morales connected these pieces, a new profile of Nathan began to emerge. Not a man devastated by betrayal, but a man obsessed with control. A man conditioned by strict, binary thinking, where love only existed within rigid lines, and any deviation from that line was punishable. This wasn't about being shocked. This was about being challenged. Morales presented her findings to the district attorney and demanded they restructure the case. The original plan had been to charge Nathan with second-degree murder, an impulsive act of violence fueled by emotional distress. But now, with the mounting evidence of premeditation, manipulation, and psychological abuse, the DA agreed to pursue first-degree murder. The news changed everything. The media shifted. Headlines changed from "Man snaps after wife's secret revealed" to "New evidence suggests murder was planned." The defense team scrambled. Their emotional distress narrative began to unravel. Sarah, watching the coverage from her small apartment, sobbed when she heard the update. She knew he was going to do something. She whispered into the camera of a local news crew. "She tried to warn me. I wish I had done more." For the first time since Jasmine's death, the tide began to turn, not just in the courtroom, but in the hearts of those watching. As the truth about the days leading up to Jasmine's murder began to surface, something shifted, not only in the courtroom, but in the broader community that had once looked at the case with ambivalence. What had first seemed like a tragic domestic dispute was unraveling into something far more sinister. A calculated act rooted in control, shame, and suppressed hatred. At the heart of this shift was Sarah Coleman. Jasmine's best friend had been silent for weeks, overwhelmed by grief, guilt, and a tidal wave of media attention. But after learning about the forensic findings, and especially the texts Jasmine had sent shortly before her death, she decided she couldn't stay quiet any longer. Sarah reached out to a local investigative journalist, Naomi Fields, who had built a reputation for digging into controversial and emotionally charged cases. Naomi listened to Sarah's story in a quiet cafe, took notes, and then asked one simple question. "Are you willing to go on record?" Sarah hesitated, but then she nodded. "If I don't, who will speak for her?" The interview aired 2 nights later on the evening news. Sarah recounted how Jasmine had expressed growing fear over Nathan's behavior. She talked about the night Jasmine cried during a phone call, saying Nathan had looked at her like she was something disgusting. She revealed that Jasmine had drafted a letter, the one she never got to send, explaining everything to Nathan, but had been too scared to leave it out in the open. The interview exploded online. It was raw, emotional, and, most importantly, undeniable. Naomi didn't stop there. She began digging into Nathan's background, contacting former colleagues, neighbors, even his church. What she uncovered painted a very different picture than the one the defense had crafted. Reverend Paul Hastings, the man who had married Nathan and Jasmine, initially refused to speak, but eventually, behind closed doors, he admitted something chilling. Months before the wedding, Nathan had asked if someone could still be saved if they married someone with a secret. He hadn't said more than that, but now, with everything in hindsight, it took on a different meaning. Naomi published a long-form piece titled "The Man Who Couldn't Accept the Truth," and within hours, it went viral. More people began to speak out. A former co-worker recalled Nathan making crude jokes about trans women. Another remembered him saying, "If someone lied to me about something that big, I'd lose it." Each account chipped away at the image of a man simply caught off guard. Instead, the portrait emerging was of someone whose beliefs had hardened into something dangerous. Meanwhile, Detective Morales worked with the district attorney to reopen parts of the investigation. They began re-interviewing witnesses, reviewing home surveillance footage from the neighborhood, and subpoenaing browser history and GPS data from Nathan's phone. What they found was damning. In the weeks before the murder, Nathan had searched terms like how to tell if someone is lying about gender, can you sue a spouse for fraud, how to confront someone hiding identity. He had also driven to a gun range 30 miles outside town, practicing with the revolver that had sat unused in his garage for years. This wasn't rage. It was preparation. When presented with the new evidence, the judge approved an upgrade to the charges. First-degree murder with aggravating factors, including hate crime motivations. It was a rare move in Alabama, but one that signaled how serious the court was now taking the case. Sarah, now a vocal advocate, joined forces with LGBTQ+ legal organizations to demand broader reform. She spoke at town halls, appeared on national panels, and even addressed a state Senate committee about the dangers trans women face, not just from strangers, but from the people closest to them. "It's not just about Jasmine anymore," she told them. "It's about every person forced to choose between living authentically and staying alive." Across Montgomery, conversations were changing. The same neighbors who once whispered about what Jasmine had hidden were now questioning why Nathan had reacted the way he did, why the church had stayed silent, why the justice system almost missed what was right in front of them. And amid this growing wave of awareness, Naomi released a second report, this time focused entirely on Jasmine's life, not her death, her resilience, her humor, her dreams, her desire to open her own beauty academy. The family she had begun building with Nathan, believing she had finally found love that accepted her whole. The article ended with Jasmine's final Instagram post, made just 3 days before she died. "I'm not perfect. I don't need to be. I just want to be real, loved and safe. That's all." That line echoed through the city. People printed it on signs, painted it on murals, wrote it in sidewalk chalk outside courthouses. The system had nearly failed Jasmine, but the truth had found its voice. And for the first time since that blood-soaked night, something resembling justice began to take form. The courtroom was packed. Rows of reporters, activists, Jasmine's friends, Nathan's remaining family. Everyone who had followed the case from the moment blood was found on the floor of that quiet house on Willow Street was now here, waiting for answers. Some came for justice. Others came for closure. A few came to see if redemption was still possible. Nathan Cole entered wearing a navy suit that didn't quite fit anymore. He looked thinner, older, his beard patchy, eyes sunken. For weeks, he had been largely silent throughout the trial, avoiding eye contact with the gallery, barely responding to his legal team. But now, he would finally face the evidence, the witnesses, and most damning of all, Jasmine's memory. The prosecution wasted no time. They opened with a haunting photo of Jasmine, smiling behind her salon chair, scissors in hand, confidence radiating from her posture. "This," the attorney said, "is who Nathan Cole destroyed. This is the life he ended. And we are here today to make sure he is held accountable, not for a moment of madness, but for a series of decisions that ended in calculated brutality." They built their case layer by layer, piece by damning piece. They showed the documents Nathan had found in Jasmine's drawer, the legal name change forms, the medical reports. They explained how he had discovered them days before the murder, and how instead of speaking to anyone, his pastor, a therapist, even Jasmine herself, he had begun searching online for how to confront and expose someone. They pulled up his search history. They replayed his browser's incognito sessions. They showed the surveillance footage from the gas station near the gun range. Nathan, in a grey hoodie, walking to the counter to buy ammo. Then, 2 hours on the range, shooting methodically. The DA's voice never rose, never cracked. It was steady and cold. Premeditation is not always dramatic. Sometimes it's silent. Sometimes it looks like a man standing in a garage, rehearsing how to kill the woman he claims to love. Then came the audio recordings. Jasmine's voicemail to Sarah, left the night before her death. Her voice shaking. "I think he knows. He won't look at me the same. I'm scared, Sarah. I'm really scared." The jury was silent. When Sarah took the stand, her composure barely held. She described Jasmine's dreams of opening her own academy, how excited she was to build a future with Nathan, and how she always said, "He makes me feel safe." She trusted him with everything, Sarah said, eyes wet. And he used that trust to break her. The defense tried to hold ground. They presented Nathan as a man pushed to the edge by a perceived deception. They brought in a psychologist who testified that Nathan had a rigid worldview shaped by childhood trauma and extreme religious conditioning, that learning Jasmine's truth triggered a psychological collapse. But the prosecution countered with Jasmine's therapist, who confirmed that Jasmine had been actively preparing to tell Nathan for weeks, that her hesitation wasn't manipulation, it was fear. She feared for her life, the therapist said plainly. Nathan himself was called to the stand. It was his first time speaking publicly since the murder. His voice was low, measured, almost hollow. "I didn't plan to kill her," he said. I lost control." The prosecutor leaned in. "You lost control after you practiced shooting a revolver for the first time in years, after you searched for how to confront someone about their gender, after you slipped anti-anxiety medication into her tea without telling her." Nathan faltered. "I didn't mean to hurt her that bad. You stabbed her 17 times. Silence. The gallery could feel the weight of the truth finally pressing down on him. There was no more denial. No more framing it as a tragic misunderstanding. The facts were laid bare, and they pointed to a man who had made a choice, not in a moment, but over days, maybe even weeks. In the final moments of the prosecution's argument, they returned to Jasmine's Instagram post. "I just want to be real, loved, and safe. That's all. That's all she wanted," the DA said, her voice catching just slightly. And instead, she died on the floor of her own home, not because she was dishonest, but because the man she loved couldn't accept her truth. And when the jury was dismissed to deliberate, the entire room exhaled at once. Hours passed. The sun dipped below the courthouse windows. People paced, prayed, cried in quiet corners of the hallway. Sarah clutched Jasmine's photo so tightly the edges crinkled. Then the doors opened. The jury returned. "Have you reached a verdict?" the judge asked. The foreman stood. "Yes, Your Honor." In the silence that followed, not even the air moved. On the charge of first-degree murder, we find the defendant, Nathan Cole, guilty. A sharp gasp came from the back row. Someone dropped a pen. Sarah covered her mouth. Nathan didn't flinch. He stared ahead, unmoving, as if the words hadn't landed yet. But they had. The judge ordered sentencing to follow the next week, life without the possibility of parole. As the court began to empty, Sarah remained seated. The reporter, Naomi Fields, sat beside her. "Is this what justice feels like?" Naomi asked softly. Sarah shook her head. "No, but it's a start." Outside, candles were being lit again. This time, not for mourning, but for memory. For Jasmine, for every trans woman who never got the chance to tell their story. The storm had not ended, but one man's silence had finally been replaced by truth, and truth, no matter how late, had found its day in court. As the word guilty echoed through the courtroom, it carried far beyond the walls of the courthouse. The conviction of Nathan Cole wasn't just a moment of personal accountability, it was a cultural tremor. By the time the news reached the evening broadcasts, the story had transformed from a local tragedy into a national flashpoint. That night, Candlelight vigils were held in over a dozen cities across the US. In Montgomery, the sidewalk in front of Jasmine's former salon was covered with flowers, candles, and handwritten notes. Someone had drawn her face in chalk, under which was written, "She mattered. She was enough." Sarah Coleman stood at the center of the gathering, holding a framed photo of Jasmine smiling at the beach, carefree, sunlit, full of life. She was more than what happened to her, Sarah told the crowd. She was more than her identity. She was art, laughter, grace, and she should still be here. Applause followed, tears, hugs between strangers. For many, it was the first time they had openly grieved someone they never met. Meanwhile, the media dissected every element of the trial. Cable news networks split their screens between courtroom footage and pundit debates. Some anchors praised the jury's decision as a win for justice and trans visibility. Others used the platform to reignite arguments about truth in relationships, veering dangerously close to excusing Nathan's actions. One particular commentator sparked outrage by suggesting, "This verdict sends a message that people can't be upset when they're lied to." The backlash was swift. Sponsors pulled ads, hashtags like "Jasmine didn't lie" and "Trans Lives Matter" flooded timelines. The clip of that statement became a case study in how deeply society still struggled to view trans women through a lens of basic human dignity. In Montgomery, the City Council held an emergency meeting to discuss community safety for LGBTQ+ individuals. For the first time in its history, the meeting opened with a trans flag on display. Speakers lined up to share stories, many of which had never been spoken aloud. Stories of fear, harassment, threats. Jasmine's death had unearthed a quiet epidemic, and now it had a face. Officer Diane Morales, though trained to maintain detachment, admitted later in a private interview that Jasmine's case haunted her. "I've seen a lot in this job," she said, "but I've never seen someone murdered so completely because of love that turned into fear." She wasn't the only one changed. Reverend Paul Hastings, once known for his fiery sermons about tradition and morality, delivered a very different message the Sunday after the verdict. His voice trembled at the pulpit. "I officiated a wedding between two people who loved each other," he began, "and I failed one of them. I failed to make space for truth, for grace, for growth. I preached certainty when I should have preached compassion." Many members of his congregation sat in stunned silence. Some left, others wept. A few stood and applauded. Nathan Cole's sentencing the following week felt less dramatic than the verdict, but no less important. The courtroom was quieter this time. Fewer cameras, no gasps. Just the cold finality of a life forever confined to prison walls. Before the sentence was read, Nathan was given the chance to speak. He stood slowly, voice hoarse. "I thought I knew what love was," he said. "But what I loved was comfort, not truth. And when the truth challenged me, I destroyed it." He paused, trembling. "I don't expect forgiveness, but I hope someday someone can use what I did to teach others how not to be me." The judge sentenced him to life without parole. There was no reaction from Nathan, no tears, no protest, only silence. After the sentencing, Jasmine's family held a press conference. Her mother, who had previously declined interviews, finally spoke. "She was my daughter before anything else," she said softly. "Before headlines, before identity debates, before any of this. She was joy. She was my baby, and now she's gone. But the world will know who she was, not just how she died." The press conference was replayed countless times across social media and news platforms. Clips of her mother's trembling hands holding a childhood photo of Jasmine, missing front teeth, braids, and the world's brightest smile, became an image burned into the nation's memory. Jasmine's story sparked policy conversations far beyond Montgomery. Several states reintroduced stalled hate crime legislation that included gender identity. School boards began holding inclusion workshops. Corporate HR departments launched training programs. In a world that had often ignored or vilified trans people, Jasmine Reed became a symbol. not of victimhood, but of visibility. Even Nathan's sister, who had testified about their upbringing, wrote a letter to the Montgomery Times. "I loved my brother, I still do, but I no longer defend him. Jasmine was his wife, she was a human being, and I pray that one day no family has to choose between loyalty and justice." The impact on the local community was equally profound. Jasmine's former salon was purchased by a local LGBTQ+ non-profit and converted into the Jasmine Reed Center, a safe space for trans and queer youth, offering mental health support, beauty services, and job training. Sarah Coleman now serves as its director. Children paint murals on the back wall. One reads, "Truth is not a threat, it's a gift." And yet, beneath the victories and the legislative changes, there remains an ache. No movement can return what was stolen. No sentence can undo the horror of that night. But what has emerged in its place is a collective refusal to let Jasmine's story be defined by her final moments. She became more than a headline, more than a case file, more than a symbol. She became a voice that continues to echo, not in the courtroom, not in protest chants, but in the hearts of every person who chooses to see someone like Jasmine not as other, but as one of us. The world watched a man try to silence truth, and the world answered, "Not this time." Jasmine Reed's death was not just the result of a violent act, it was the culmination of years of silence, societal shame, and the deadly consequences of refusing to see others as fully human. Her story forced a mirror onto an entire community, onto a country, asking a question many still struggle to answer. What do we do with truth when it challenges our comfort? For Nathan Cole, truth became an enemy, not because it was harmful, but because it demanded growth, acceptance, change. He wasn't prepared for that, and instead of confronting his own limitations, he turned against the person who trusted him most. The courtroom verdict may have brought a sense of justice, but the real lesson lies beyond legal documents and sentencing statements. It lives in the subtle, daily ways we choose to accept or reject the people around us. Jasmine's life, her strength, her grace, her fear, reminds us that authenticity is not deception, that honesty is not betrayal. Too often, society conflates identity with manipulation. People ask, why didn't she tell him sooner? Instead of asking, why wasn't it safe for her to do so? That is the core tragedy. Not that Jasmine kept a part of herself guarded, but that the world had taught her she needed to. Her story sheds light on a dangerous pattern. When vulnerability meets ignorance, the result is often cruelty. But if there's one thing her life proved, it's that visibility matters. Being seen as you are is not a luxury, it's a right. The impact of Jasmine's murder echoes in classrooms, churches, homes, and hearts. It challenges parents to raise children who don't fear what's different. It pushes institutions to protect marginalized voices. And it demands that we re-examine what justice truly means. Justice isn't just punishing the guilty, it's honoring the truth. And truth, uncomfortable, inconvenient truth, is what Jasmine carried with her every day, even when it frightened her, even when it cost her everything. Jasmine's legacy is not defined by how she died, but by what she stood for. Love without conditions, identity without shame, and the bravery to be herself in a world that often punished that very thing. Her story leaves us with a choice. Will we remain bystanders to prejudice wrapped in tradition, or will we become defenders of truth, even when it makes us uncomfortable? Because the lesson Jasmine leaves behind is clear. It's not enough to be kind when it's easy. We must be brave when it's hard. In the months following Nathan Cole's conviction, Montgomery began to change. Not all at once and not without resistance, but noticeably. The quiet southern city, once known for its traditions and hesitations, started talking about things it had long ignored. Jasmine Reed's name became a fixture in schools, community centers, and even church discussion groups. Students painted murals across public buildings, images of her smile accompanied by messages of acceptance and hope. One mural near the courthouse simply read, Tell the truth. Live it anyway. The house on Willow Street, where the tragedy unfolded, was eventually purchased by an anonymous donor and turned into a transitional shelter for LGBTQ+ youth who had been displaced by family rejection. The home was renamed Jasmine's Place. There, young people now find not just a roof over their heads, but a space to heal, to be seen, and to imagine futures full of possibility. Nathan Cole remains incarcerated in a federal prison. He receives no visitors. According to staff reports, he spends most of his days reading, rarely speaking. He has reportedly refused interviews, even with reporters who have offered to present his side. Sarah Coleman, Jasmine's closest friend and now a prominent activist, travels the country sharing Jasmine's story. She visits schools, correctional facilities, and legislative offices, urging people to see the humanity in trans lives before another tragedy makes the news. At the state level, Alabama passed a bill named in Jasmine's honor, the READ Act, which provides funding for trans-affirming mental health services and legal protections against gender identity-based hate crime. It was a hard-won fight, with protests, debates, and opposition, but it passed. Jasmine's name is now etched into state law, a reminder that even in death, her voice could still create change. Yet, not all wounds healed. Some of Jasmine's family moved away from Montgomery, unable to bear the constant reminders. Her mother still keeps Jasmine's childhood room untouched. Her father, who had once rejected her, now attends every memorial vigil with tears streaming down his face. He carries a photo of her at all times. "I didn't understand her when she was alive," he once told a crowd, "but I'll spend the rest of my life making sure the world does now." The media eventually moved on, as it always does. New tragedies surfaced, new names were mourned, but Jasmine's story remains embedded in the hearts of those who loved her and those who found strength through her. In small ways, her presence still lingers. A quote on a poster, a name on a bill, a child who learns to love themselves a little sooner, and perhaps that's the most powerful impact of all, not a headline or a verdict, but a quiet shift in the way someone sees another person, with more patience, more truth, and a little more love. Now it's your turn to speak. What do you think justice looks like in a case like this? Was the verdict enough? Could anything ever be enough to balance the weight of a life lost so brutally, so senselessly? Jasmine Reed's story is not just about tragedy. It's about how silence can kill, how shame can isolate, and how love, when twisted by fear and ignorance, can turn deadly. But it's also about truth, about what it costs to live it, and what it means when we finally begin to defend it. If this story moved you, if you felt the weight of her absence, if you heard her voice echoing between every word, then do something about it. Start by sharing her name, Jasmine Reed. Say it out loud. Share this video. Send it to someone who needs to hear it. Post it where someone might see themselves in her story and feel a little less alone. Then, leave a comment below. We want to know your thoughts. Do you think the justice system got it right? What would you have done in Nathan's place? What does love mean when truth is at stake? Use your voice, use your heart, and don't forget to subscribe. Because every week we bring you stories that the world needs to hear, stories that challenge, inspire, and remind us what it means to be human. Click the bell so you never miss one. And remember, truth deserves to be heard. Always.